Hey, Leaders Lab alumni, this is Brian Gillooly. I'm your newly minted AFCOM director. Unfortunately, as most of you may know already, Sarah Markey had to leave us, unfortunately, so I will be assuming some of her role. We'll also be hiring a person to backfill for her, and of course, Luke is always around to help everybody out. But those are some recent changes. But guess who I have here with me today? Carrie Goetz. Carrie is she was the Leaders Lab advisor for us in Phoenix. And Carrie, thank you so much for joining us for this update. You're always so good with your time, so we really appreciate it.
Sure.
So we talked about TCO and data center capacity in Phoenix and had a terrific conversation. One of the first things I wanted to ask you for the Leaders Lab alumni group here is there anything, any new updates on the topic, or the possibility of you wanted to underscore something that was discussed, especially something you discussed? Because I do want to ask you about some of the things you heard from attendees in a moment here. But what are some of the things you might want to update or underscore for us from the topic?
So I think probably the biggest thing that we sort of started out, we were looking at capacity planning and some other things. And we really started with there being a lack of synergy amongst all the different departments within IT and certainly all the stakeholders in the data center. And, you know, it is an ecosystem at the end of the day, but often because budgets are siloed, decisions are siloed too. And as we went through, you know, that was one of the things that came up with even the attendees in agreement. In some cases, you know, like we had an engineer who said, you know, when he starts engineering a space, he's completely firewalled off from the end user that's going to be in the space. Yep. And so trying to do that capacity planning, in a lot of cases, it's happening on assumption. It's happening on, you know, in colo cases, sort of how they manage the floor, but not necessarily maybe, unless it's an anchor tenant, of course, what that build needs to be. And so there's other things too that are kind of changing the capacity and the capacity needs within the data center. But unless everybody buys in, it's a much trickier situation.
Yeah, and I remember that theme of communication being coming up all the time, and collaboration. And there was an example, I'm pretty sure it was in this one, where there was an order of, I believe it was servers or something, and IT had not talked to facilities about it. And it was sitting at the loading dock, ready to be implemented, and facilities said, well, wait a second here. You know, we haven't been alerted to this. We still have to make sure it fits into our grid, that we have the right cooling, it goes in the right aisle, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's that communication issue just seemed really huge to me.
Yeah, and one of the things that came up was, you know, this is really an area where those commissioning and decommissioning plans come into play, and how every stakeholder in the data center, you know, the switch team needs to sign off because they'll be providing network connections. The security department needs to sign off. Facilities needs to sign off. Like every single piece of the equation needs to be involved in any equipment that comes in or out of that space. Or if there's, you know, an issue with any of the equipment, it needs to be communicated, you know, amongst all stakeholders. So that really was a big topic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And since this group includes alumni from other Leaders Labs, not just the one we did in Phoenix, although they're here also to listen in on some updates here. But as far as the people who may not have been there, was there anything that you can remember, at least, that was described by some of the attendees that surprised you or made you think a little bit more about your approach to capacity planning?
Yeah, so one of the things that really came about was that there wasn't a really big consensus that everybody was just in love with DCIM packages. You know, the fact that they're kind of a time-consuming to install for starters. But, you know, there's a lot of different packages that happen across the data center floor. There's asset management, there's all kinds of stuff. And, you know, trying to incorporate those with DCIM and incorporate those with monitoring packages, that there's not really one cohesive way to manage all of that capacity in a data center. And so, you know, outside of something that was homegrown, I think that was a big challenge to the industry, is to come up with something like that. But again, you know, there's different stakeholders, they want different things out of the package. But that one was kind of a surprise. I think the surprise, you know, the engineers talking about how they're firewalled off from the people in the data center was a bit of a shocker. I kind of feel like that should be, I wouldn't let an architect design my house without my input. So that was kind of a surprise. And I think another kind of reoccurring theme, and I think this is probably really true across all of IT, was that people need to quit being afraid for jobs. Like, we lose a lot of innovation cycle and a lot of people just trying things out and seeing if it'll work and learning better ways and trying better ways, because people are so afraid that if there's a failure, somebody's going to go down. And I guess the last thing that was kind of a shocker was, even in some industries where you would really, really expect money to be spent for DR and uptime, that the money was not there until one of their competitors had a really expensive outage, and then the CEO's like, okay, we're writing a check now. What do you need?
Yeah.
But really, it probably should have happened all along.
How do you get that into the budget and planning at the beginning, though? Because it is one of those things that it's not a revenue generator, so the people who control the purse strings are generally not certainly not inclined to bring it up in the beginning in the budgeting process, but also balk at the providing the dollars for it because of that very reason of it not being a revenue generator. When you don't have an example to point to at one of the competitors who had a horrible outage, how do you convince them?
So, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think that's really part of having stakeholders involved early on in decision making and being expressly involved. So, we had the example of the upside down funnel where there's this much information, and when it gets up here, it's this much. And it's definitely not the best way to do it, right? So we want to make sure that stakeholders know what the risk is, that we have real downtime costs that organizations can figure out for themselves. And as the budget cycle happens, it shouldn't be one department vying against another. It should be all of them together as stakeholders trying to figure out the best way to make the whole thing work and stay up.
Any parting comments you want to make about the topic? And I do want to plug your workshop at the at Data Center World too.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I think one thing that you'll really enjoy, this white paper, we made it very prescriptive. So we covered a few things. We covered capacity planning. We covered the shortage of talent in the industry and how it's going to be harder moving forward to manage capacity with less people to do so. And so we really went out of our way to list what the problems are, what the solutions are, and put some, I think, really good concrete things on the table. The other thing I would say is that if you haven't participated in a leaders lab and you get the opportunity, we had a blast all day. I mean, it really was a meeting of the minds. And I think for a lot of the participants, it was sort of an affirmation of the stuff that they've been thinking all along is, other people are thinking the same thing, right? So, I think it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, thanks for that plug. I really appreciate it. And it really is an interactive group. I had one person come up to me at lunch saying, I thought I was coming here and just taking notes, and I've been so immersed in this. And it's a great opportunity to capture best practices, get the affirmation, validation that you're not the only one suffering.
And it's not vendor specific either. That's the cool thing, that vendors weren't really discussed. It was solutions.
Yep. Excellent. So thank you for that. And you did mention the white paper. Everybody will have an opportunity to get a free copy of this white paper if they attend Data Center World. So we hope to see you there. You can download the executive summary if you go to AFCOM.com now. And we encourage you to do that and also share it with whoever you'd like. Carrie's actually one of the authors, but that's the other thing about Leaders Labs is everybody who attends is an author of the white paper. Carrie helped put some of it together at the end there, and we appreciate that, but everybody who attended is an author.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that. And one last thing, so you have a workshop at Data Center World on this topic, right?
I do, yeah. I'm doing two, actually. So one is Soup to Servers. It's a 3-hour class on sort of everything that sits inside the data center ecosystem. So if you happen to be on the facility side and don't quite get the IT side or vice versa, or you're new to the industry, it's kind of a great way to get a high-level view of all the things that sit in there and maybe foster some of those communications moving forward.
And you also have another session you're doing, too. You're busy. So
I am, yeah. But it's good. It's a great industry. I love it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and we're glad to have you for this. Like I said, you're so generous with your time. We really appreciate it. So thanks very much. And to the Leaders Lab alumni who are watching, we appreciate your time. And stay in touch and network with us. Talk down here.
Absolutely.
yourselves. Thanks very much.
Thanks.